All right. So, as Sam mentioned, we got two of us here. This is John, and Rachel's sitting to my left. The way we'll run through this, I'll start with just a little bit of background on the, a little bit on ZS, the research that we conducted, and why. And then Rachel will take us through the, a lot of data. So there's going to be some data slides here that you're going to enjoy having, I guess, after the webinar. And just so folks know, you will have the opportunity to download a recording of this webinar as well as a PDF of the presentation. So you need to take screenshots or jot down numbers, because there are a number of them. Okay? So just 1 minute on ZS. So for those of you who don't know us, ZS Associates is probably the largest professional services firm focused exclusively on B2B sales and marketing. There's about 3,000 of us, ZSers around the world, and about 21 offices. And we work across a number of different industries, including high tech. So I think we bring some perspective from other industries. And where we focus is kind of all things sales and marketing. We have a full range of services from consulting. We'll help companies actually build out their sales and marketing organizations and operations. And in some cases, we'll actually provide some outsourcing services. Our company was founded by a couple of Northwestern University professors who applied their academic research to the subject area. And the reason I bring that up is research is kind of in our heritage. So studies like the one we're about to go through is something we do frequently. We're a very data-driven organization, and oftentimes we'll do work for clients, but in some cases like this, we'll sort of do research on our own nickel and share it with the industry. Okay, so enough about us. Just a little bit on the research and this issue that we're diving into. So look, just looking at who's on the call, we obviously have a lot of people from bigger high-tech organizations, some smaller ones. We're all after the same thing, right? It's about creating positive customer experiences that lead to sticky relationships that ultimately enable repeat sales, right? So this has been an issue that we face not just in high tech but across industries. So we've been thinking a lot about this and really conducting research to understand this challenge. So how do you create these positive customer experiences that we see successful companies actually profit from? And in some sectors, particularly high tech, this is a pretty complicated question because of the fact that the value chain is pretty complex. There are intermediaries, partners, who actually interact with customers regularly and have a huge impact on their experience. So all of us on the phone probably know there's resellers, alliance partners, service providers, agents, even distributors that will, in some cases, have the same or even a larger impact on our end customers' experience. So with this kind of as a framework and understanding this is a complex issue impacting a number of companies, for about the last, I'd say, 18 months to 2 years, we've been conducting research to get the industry's perspective on what are the drivers of positive experience for all parties involved. So we've looked at, in recent studies, the relationships between partners and vendors and customers and vendors. Basically, on this chart you see here, we've looked at all these, these 5 different relationships. Today we're going to focus on one, which is really the relationship between customers, specifically small and medium-sized businesses, and their channel partners when they're purchasing cloud services. So I think what you'll see here today is some interesting findings. It's even more interesting when you start to look at linking these different perspectives together. The voice of the customer with the voice of the partner with the voice of the employees in your channel sales and marketing organizations. And when we put all those pieces of the puzzle together, we start to see some interesting trends that we're helping clients with. So we'll talk about one of those pieces. So why cloud? It probably doesn't even need to really be discussed too much, but obviously for most high-tech companies, technology as a service, cloud are hugely important topics, have been for years. And what we've seen is it's not a new topic. There's lots of research out there that highlights what small and medium-sized businesses are purchasing and why. So kind of felt like there wasn't a need to turn over that rock. but comparatively less on how those companies are making purchasing decisions. So once you decide a product, or even before deciding a product, how do you choose some of these intermediaries, some of these partners, when making a decision regarding cloud services? So that was what we really wanted to focus, is how are small and medium-sized businesses making these decisions. And the other thing we thought about pretty early on was the fact that we wanted to look at small businesses differently than mid-sized businesses. And the reason for this, I guess, is just maybe it's been something that's been bugging us for a while, but we always lump these two together. Maybe it's SMB, it's a cool acronym, but is that right? Is it right to be thinking about and assuming that very small businesses behave in the same way that mid-sized businesses are? Obviously there's a lot of focus on the mid-market, but we wanted to kind of parse apart the data and look at those two sets of target customers differently and understand some of the questions we're going to go through in a minute here. So first of all, what portion in those two segments are using, we simplified it, software as a service or infrastructure as a service. We've obviously seen a lot of that data. We wanted to kind of get our own take on adoption. Second question is, to what extent are SMB organizations purchasing cloud services from indirect channels? So direct or indirect, directly from the vendor or service provider or through a reseller. We wanted to focus on understanding that mix. And then when an IT buyer was actually selecting or purchasing through a reseller, how do they select the reseller? What are the key factors, conditions, issues that they consider? So that's the focus of the research. In addition, we looked at how it's working from the customer's perspective. What value are the resellers that are currently in place providing before and after a sale? We know what vendors are hoping they're doing. We wanted to find out, from the folks actually involved in reaching purchases, the role the resellers are playing. And then, is it working? So from a customer's perspective, from a small and medium-sized business customer, are they satisfied with the support that the resellers are providing, and are they willing to basically advocate on their behalf, given their level of satisfaction? So those are the key questions. Then obviously we wanted to say, what does this mean when we looked at the data? What are the key implications for all of us that are thinking about launching or driving growth of software as a service or infrastructure as a service? Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. And start with the first question, which is how quickly are, and to what extent and how quickly are small and mid-sized businesses adopting cloud services? So there's lots of data here, and we've got some of the stats that I'm sure we've all seen recently, or similar numbers thrown out there, and they're pretty bullish. I mean, obviously you see some of these that they're almost, you kind of have to scratch your head and say, are these right? We've got Northbridge Venture Partners that does an annual survey, and they claim that SaaS adoption is up to 74%, which is unbelievable to me. You have IDC making claims about, they've got a number of 3/4 of mid-sized businesses will be using the cloud in some fashion by the end of this year, so that's about another 60 days away. And IDC will also claim that it's adoption is growing by 20%. And will grow in that way for the next 5 years. So those are pretty big numbers, and having been in the industry for a while, sometimes you're a little skeptical at that, because there's a tendency to overhype the cloud. So the first question we decided to answer when we kicked off this research was we wanted to get our own numbers. So we went out and selected close to 3,500 U.S. sales and our small and mid-sized businesses at random, and ask them this question: to what extent are you using SaaS in infrastructure as a service? And what we found, it's another data point, but it's recent. This is a couple months ago, is that to a certain extent it's confirmed strong adoption, but maybe not to the extent that you'll see with some of the broader studies. We found about 45%, almost half, of companies in the U.S. in this size are have used either SaaS and/or infrastructure as a service. So it's a big number, still growing, but I guess the implication here is that we're not tapped out yet. There's still quite an opportunity for growth in this space. So we believe this is a little bit more of a realistic number of cloud adoption given the sample size and recency of the data. And then given the focus of what we're doing, we went one step further. We said, okay, who did you buy it from, right? And this is where it starts to really get interesting because we just really haven't found much data here on this topic, as I mentioned. So we found, kind of surprisingly, that almost half of SMB customers purchased their software as a service or infrastructure as a service from an indirect channel, meaning someone other than the provider of that service, which is a really big number from our perspective. And again, this sample size is 1,200 in a pretty short amount of time. So what this, I think, confirmed for us is that the channel obviously has been important in sort of for purchases of on-premise technology. It is the same for cloud-based services. So that's the backdrop. We're looking at half of SMB customers in the U.S. that have are purchasing an increasing number, and then half of them actually using indirect channels and have in the past. So the focus of our research was really to understand that 47% here, the 50%, but the half of partners that are actually purchasing from channel partners, and real specifically recent users of the channel. And what I'll do now is I'll turn it over to Rachel to talk about how we zoomed in on that slice in some of the findings. Okay, so Rachel?
Great, thanks. So as John mentioned, we really wanted to do a deep dive on those SMB customers who purchased a cloud service, specifically SaaS, software as a service or infrastructure as a service, from a reseller within the last 12 months. And so we did an online survey of the decision makers across these different companies, both from the IT decision maker as well as commercial decision makers in these companies responsible for these purchase decisions. And as John mentioned, this was in Q3 of 2014, so relatively recent. Okay, and we received responses from quite a good distribution of different types of decision makers, and obviously also senior folks. So we had a lot of VPs, some owners, given that this is small medium businesses, and then some managers and supervisory folks as well. And due to sampling design, we wanted to ensure an even mix between small and medium-sized businesses. Okay, so for our respondents that purchased cloud services through a reseller within the last year, we saw that 44% purchased only SaaS within the last year, 38% purchased both SaaS and infrastructure products, and then another 18% only purchased infrastructure products. And then again, when we look at what type of reseller they purchased these products through, overwhelmingly you saw that they purchased it from the value-added reseller channel. So we also wanted to understand, what brands of SaaS and infrastructure as a service products these respondents were purchasing. And so we asked them, for each of the individual product types that you purchased within the last year, what brand of product was that? And overwhelmingly, we saw the names that we would expect to see, the Microsofts, the Ciscos, the IBMs, the Googles. But we did also receive, a handful of other newer, up-and-coming names that are growing in this space.
Okay, well, before we go forward, I think people tend to trickle in on these calls. We thought it might make sense before we start sharing even more of the data about what these folks, the respondents, told us, that we'd ask to poll the audience. So Sam, why don't you throw up the question just to get maybe a little input from folks that are on the phone.
Sure thing. All right, the poll is launched.
Okay, so the question here we're asking is, we're about to actually share with you some data about small and mid-sized businesses. The question is, does your company have a separate cloud channel strategy for small versus mid-sized businesses? And you can see the options here. So if you can go ahead and select, let's just get a read on where folks are coming from that are participating in the webinar.
All right, we're about halfway there. I'll leave it open for another 15 seconds or so and let everyone make sure they can chime in. All right, if anyone wants to get their last-minute votes in. Okay. So it looks like about 28% are saying yes, but the strategy varies for small versus mid-sized businesses. 39% says no, our small and mid-sized business strategies are the same. 11% are no, we do not have a clear cloud channel strategy for SMB. And 22% are not applicable and do not sell cloud services.
Okay, good. Well, I think it's going to be interesting. Obviously, you can read between the lines. We've found some differences between small and mid-sized businesses that Rachel's going to talk about now as we get into the first question, how they are selecting resellers.
Thanks. So one of the questions that we asked the respondents was to allocate points to the attributes, the cloud services reseller attributes that were most important to them as they were deciding to purchase software as a service. And so what you'll see is you compare small versus medium here. First and foremost, prior experience and relationship, that jumps to the top. It's the most important attribute for both our small and medium businesses. But where it becomes interesting is you look at pricing, and you see that small businesses are much more price sensitive than our medium businesses. And when then you look at, okay, well, what is it that is more important to the medium businesses, then you see they want a reseller that has their specific industry expertise. They want a reseller that's going to make the implementation fast and easy for them. And they're also looking for a reseller that has the recognition and the certification from their cloud vendors. So really they're looking for the industry expertise and the technical competence and proof of that from the vendors as they're choosing which reseller to work with.
So I think that makes sense, and I think the one thing that jumped out at us here is building on some of those comments is this issue around recognition, and we know that there are a number of organizations that have created specific competencies for cloud. And have tried to designate channel partners that are certified to actually sell cloud. And as Rachel mentioned, there's big differences there. It's really more important to the medium-sized businesses, the mid-sized business, than it is to the small guys. Small guys are more price sensitive, and it's about about the relationship.
Okay. And so similarly, we asked them, what about the attributes when you're purchasing infrastructure as a service products from these resellers? And again, what we found is still relationship far and away, is most important for both the small and the medium guys. But again, let's look at the differences. Where do we see differences between the small and the medium? And things that jump out again are depth of industry expertise being, again, very important for our medium-sized businesses. Again, you see the speed and ease of implementation. And then on this one, what you see jumping out from the medium folks is this training and support that's provided. They want their reseller capable of providing that training and support. So again, they're looking for that value-added reseller who could help them through some of these more difficult implementations and ongoing execution of these solutions.
So just we'll talk about implications toward the end of this, but the question this raises is, if it's so important in the small business area to actually have this relationship, then, if we're building a channel, I think it's key to look at where there's already relationships in place in the small side, in the small sector. And the medium-sized business, maybe there's a little bit more opportunity to bring in new relationships, provided those partners actually have the right expertise and capabilities. Again, a little bit of a different need there. Okay.
Okay. So the next thing we wanted to look at is, again, what is the value that these cloud service resellers are providing these small, medium customers, both pre-sale and post-sale. And so how we decided to look at it is, okay, what are the kind of typical or standard activities that occur pre-sale, and then what activities occur post-sale. So for pre-sale, we have these 4 activities: the requirements definition, the product or the vendor assessment, the service provider assessment, and then the actual solution design and implementation. And then on the post-sale support, we have the SLA monitoring and reporting, customer service support, help desk type activities, maintenance and warranty, and then also the billing and the invoicing. So that's what we asked our respondents to provide us feedback on, as far as who is executing each of these different types of activities. And so if we say for the pre-sale activities, who of the list of different parties in this relationship are executing each of these different activities? So you have, is it the reseller? Is it the actual tech vendor? Or is this something you're performing in-house? Who is providing this activity? And overwhelmingly, what we found in the pre-sale activities is that these customers are doing these things in-house, internally. And if they're not doing them in-house or internally, they're turning first to the tech vendor. And very inconsistently did we see, some resellers are actively involved in these activities.
I think what's interesting here, too, is, well, first of all, it's shocking that, in the area of, say, for example, requirements definition, that the reseller is only 5% of the time helping there. But I think what's interesting is just the extent to which the respondents to our survey, again, these are recent purchasers, are self-sufficient, right? They're doing a lot in-house, which in an area like this, particularly on the infrastructure as a service area, which is a little bit new, you would think that they'll be leading in looking for help. In some cases they are, they're just not turning the real resellers for that help. So it's kind of an interesting scenario we're in.
So again, we wanted to follow that up then. Well, what about post-sale? Are we seeing that our resellers are now more involved in the post-sale activities? And what we found is, while yes, they are more involved, the first source of support for these guys post-sales is, again, the tech vendor. And that they're still not turning to their reseller even for these post-sale activities, which was a little surprising as well.
Okay. So is it working? I mean, I think so. I think, again, punchline there is, doesn't seem like the resellers are doing as much as you would hope in terms of shaping decisions. And they, in the back end, in some cases they're providing support, but in some cases it's a model where the provider of the service, the tech vendor, actually is doing a lot of that. Is it working? And I think that's the next polling question that we would like, is just from your perspective, maybe having looked at this from your company's perspective, how satisfied are our customers? So Sam, if you want to fire up the next polling question.
Sure. Here we go.
So here it's, it's asked that question. How satisfied are your customers to the extent they're actually, providing, purchasing through resellers in this area? So if you can take a stab at answering whether they're highly satisfied, satisfied, somewhat satisfied, not satisfied at all, or if it really, this question doesn't really apply to you, I'd be interested to get the feedback here.
All right, we can get some answers coming in. I'll leave it open for another 15 seconds or so. Let everyone get their chance to weigh their vote in. All right, we're getting a little bit of a last-minute push here, so I'll hold on another 4 or 5 seconds for any last bit of answers here. Okay, that looks pretty good.
All right. I feel like we should have one of those maps we probably saw on TV last night where we can zoom in on the individual country to see what the responses are here. But so basically, here's the responses. Not many people are very satisfied, not surprisingly, and we got a mix of folks that are satisfied and somewhat satisfied. So kind of lukewarm responses, and I think that it's an interesting segue to what we saw, because we saw a similar story from our respondents.
So what we wanted to understand is how likely our respondents would be to recommend their cloud service reseller to a colleague or a peer. And what we found here is that, their net promoter scores, their, willingness to advocate for their cloud service reseller was significantly lower than a lot of the other players that you see in the IT space here.
Okay, so what's interesting here, again, lukewarm. It's sort of in the middle. I mean, we didn't pick up on huge dissatisfaction from the customer's perspective. They're kind of okay with the role that the resellers are playing, but when we push them to say, would you really advocate on the behalf of your reseller, lower numbers, and kind of in the mix of the industry. Definitely some vendors that'll have that we see listed here on the screen that have a little bit of a higher net promoter score, and then there's some that are lower. So we wanted to peel the onion on that.
Yep, so as John had mentioned, we wanted to dive a little deeper and understand, if there's differences across the different channel partner types, given what, some of the small versus medium businesses are saying as far as what the attributes and what they're looking for from these resellers as they're making these decisions. And so is there a difference when we look across the different types of resellers? And what we found here is that, those that are providing these more, the higher level value-add services, more involved in the business and providing that advice to these customers, so the consultancies typically, they have much higher NPS score, much greater levels of advocacy that these customers are willing to stand up and recommend doing business with these resellers.
So yep. So the number to zoom in on here is the 44% in the bottom right-hand corner, and more importantly, that 55%. So to the extent a customer views their reseller as a consultant, right, as somebody who can provide guidance, then their advocacy, their net promoter score is kind of near the top of the industry. To the extent they're viewed as just a reseller, someone who can integrate, kind of connect the wires and so forth, they're even lower. So this seems to be the lever that you need to pull, is getting the partners able to position themselves as having advisory services. So net, what we found is that the attributes that are important when choosing a reseller between small and mid-sized businesses are different. Relationships even more important for small businesses, and some of the expertise, the capabilities come into play more with medium-sized businesses. The role that partners are playing is pretty transactional, right? They're not providing a lot of value from the customer's perspective before the sale, and even post-sale, they're really not viewed as by many customers as who's providing that post-sale support. And lukewarm sentiment in terms of the satisfaction, the loyalty that those customers actually have for their resellers, unless they actually have the capability to provide advisory services. So, so what does this mean? And this gets back to the title of our webinar here. Is what are the implications for the vendors that are actually trying to sell SaaS or infrastructure services through the channels? Obviously, many of the folks on the phone have large channel bases, how do you find those diamonds in the rough? How do you find those resellers that are actually viewed positively as value contributors from the customer's perspective, such that they provide a platform for growth? So we came up with 3 implications. First one is one size doesn't fit all. You know, let's go back to what some of the findings were. We see that many companies are, you know, they're sticking with the cool acronym, right? SMB. It's kind of nice to have an SMB channel strategy. It's not enough. S thinks differently than M in our perspective from this data. It's important to have a more granular channel strategy for cloud services down to that individual segment, and the reason is that they need to address different customer needs and preferences. So one implication is, and maybe as you're heading into 2015 and thinking about the channel strategy and what you do to support your channel partners in this area, is thinking differently about small versus mid-sized business segments. Second implication is all about those sticky relationships. SMB customers strongly prefer partners with whom they have a relationship. That's even more important in small and mid-sized businesses. So there's this debate that we're all having about, do we try to take our current partners that have those relationships and enable them to actually provide cloud services, or do we try to bring in somebody from the outside? In other words, do you try to train a dog to do tricks, or do you buy a cat? Right? In this instance, what we're finding is that in the small segment, it's important to leverage those relationships, and so you lean more to really trying to make sure that you're honoring those sticky relationships. There's another implication here, which is that customers don't feel that the resellers are providing the value in shaping their decisions in many instances. So don't overpay. It's probably time to rethink the incentives that you put in place for the channel partners in this area, and make sure that you're not overpaying for perceived value. If they really are just a transactional channel, then their compensation should be adjusted accordingly. And then the third is, obviously, you want those advisors. So you want your resellers to be viewed as cloud Sherpas, kind of a funny term for a webinar early in the day for many of you. But the idea is that, despite really high adoption levels, according to us, 45% in SMB of cloud services, customers still need guidance when they're developing their cloud or their technology strategy. And obviously, those companies that can answer their questions and help them on that journey are perceived as being more valuable to them. And what we see now is we have concrete data that shows they have much higher levels of customer advocacy. Remember the 44 and the 55%. So to the extent you're trying to build a loyal channel that'll help you grow, you want to find the folks that are currently or can become those advisors. So there's lots more we can say about this. We're a little bit over the 30 minutes. What I would say is definitely you can download this webinar, other related topics from the channel focus site. There's actually a number of different special interest areas. We're sticking this one in channel sales, which is the area that ZS sponsors. So to the extent you're interested in this, I'd go look for this information and definitely post a question. We'll be happy to answer it, and more importantly, there are other members of the community that would be happy to answer and start a debate on some of the topics we covered today. If you have other questions, and we could take some of them now, but you could feel free to, about this survey or topic in general, you've got our contact information here for myself and Rachel. Don't hesitate to actually drop us a line or give us a call, and we'd love to continue the conversation. So what I would do, though, is, given that it's middle of the day for a number one of us, or late for others, Sam, why don't we open it up to questions and see if there's anything we could answer right now about the study and the material we just covered.
Perfect. Sounds good, John. If any of the members of the audience would like to ask a question, please raise your hand using the Raise Hand button located in the GoToWebinar control panel. If your question gets answered at any point, please lower your hand to remove yourself from the queue. And if you prefer, you can always ask via the chat box or the question box, also in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. So to start out, did your survey find that cloud service resellers are playing a large pre-sales role with mid-sized versus small businesses?
Yep, so Sam, I'll take that one. And as we compared the activity involvement for our resellers, we actually did not see a significant difference into whether our resellers were more involved with small businesses versus medium businesses. The only area that we did see more involvement was with small businesses in the requirement definition activity. But that still was only 9%. So still channel partners were not significantly involved overall at the grand scheme in that activity.
Yeah, which I think, that might be a consequence of the fact that many companies are viewing these two segments similarly, and so we're asking the partners to play the same role for both, and that's what the customers are seeing.
Great. Are small business customers more or less satisfied with their cloud service resellers compared to mid-sized businesses?
Yeah, no, I'll take this one again, and I think, just adding on to John's comment there is, again, we're asking our channel partners to play the same role for both small and medium, and so they're seeing it the same way. And really satisfaction is nearly identical between small and medium customers currently across both.
So we have the ability, we can cut it a number of different ways based on the data. We could look at size of company, what was purchased, and even in more granular categories below software as a service. I think we saw the same story. That's why we asked.
Excellent. Are there any good resources available to help determine the best incentive programs for your resellers?
Good resources. Well, I think there are definitely we'd love to engage in a discussion about that. I think there are a number of studies that I've seen that start to look at the extent to which different types of incentives, structurally discounts, rebates, spiffs, other types of financial incentives drive behavior. Cutting to the punchline with a lot of that is it really depends. And I think it depends on what's being sold, and it depends on the particular types of service that you're trying to drive growth for. So I think that like I said, I'd be happy to maybe point you to a couple things if you wanted to reach out to me on that. I guess the other thing that we found is maybe it's a related topic, is that it's not just the incentives to the partners, but it's also the incentives to your channel sales team working with the partners. And actually, there's a previous webinar where what we found is that in many instances in this area with cloud, there's some misalignment between partner incentives and channel sales compensation that creates some adverse behaviors. So that's another thing. As I think, maybe restating the question. It's you're trying to drive behavior on both sides of the transaction, and it's important to look at both of those.
Great. Okay, we have one here that someone's curious how margin structures are constructed. They followed up with, it seems that resellers are acting more like an agent broker, and they're curious what types of resellers are at play. They commented it certainly doesn't bode well for those with more of a system integrator profile, so they're not really sure where the value add piece is really coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I think this is one thing that it's probably a long conversation. Is there's been a lot of thinking done about what are the role, or more specifically roles, that will succeed in the future when it comes to selling cloud services through an indirect channel. Is the model going to look more like agent broker model? Is it going to look more like a reseller model? And then correspondingly, how should we be compensating people? I think what's interesting here is that if we look at the data and what it's saying in terms of what the resellers are actually doing, at least according to the respondents we have, it's pretty transactional. They're looking more like an agent. They're just kind of there to enable the transaction, right? And they're not viewed as providing a lot in the way of guidance consulting type skills or even technical integration type skills. So it looks like that they're playing more of that kind of agent role, but I just know, and I'll be recording the phone, many times they're being paid as if they are a reseller. We're applying some of the same compensation incentive models, paying them on discount and so forth. So, putting in place things like deal registration and all other types of incentives that assume that they're playing a larger role than they do. So this gets back to maybe implication number 2, which is we got to decide one way or the other. If they're gonna be more of an agent, then we need to put the compensation model in place that suits that model. If they are going to be playing more of a solution provider role, then you need a compensation model that compensates them that way. But you got to make sure they're actually able to play that role, because in some cases it doesn't seem like they actually are able or are.
Great. Another question was there any differentiation between the types of cloud apps and services? High adoption rates of secondary apps is not the same as core services applications.
Yep. So we broke down the data. We have a whole level lower of categories of software as a service that kind of address that, as well as categories of infrastructure as a service that we could share with you to the extent someone is interested in that topic. What we found, I think, is you do see some differences when we start getting down a notch lower. Obviously, we're working with a particular sample size, so we wanted to make sure we were sharing significant differences. But the story was similar. I think that we didn't really see for any particular category of SaaS. If you got down to CRM or collaboration, ERP, kind of the only area I guess I would say maybe on the SaaS side where we saw some differences really was in the area of business intelligence applications. That's definitely an area where I don't know if you want to talk about some of the differences we saw there, Rachel, in that particular category for SaaS.
Yeah, I would just say with business intelligence, that's one of the newer and faster growing categories for the SaaS products, as far as people are beginning to really look at that and purchase it a lot more in this last year versus some of the other more core or foundational SaaS products like your CRM or some of the more core business processes that maybe have been adopted a few years back already now, and it is integrated already. So I would say that's probably the one that jumped out the most.
Yeah, and I think it's because it's a newer area, and the purchases that we were asking the respondents to comment on were more recent. You think about it, they needed more in the way of advisory service, more guidance, maybe a little bit less self-sufficient in the pre-sales area. But I guess maybe to take that offline, we could definitely talk about some of the differences by category, subcategory. But I don't think it changes the overall trends and implications that we're covering.
Excellent. On the split between channel partners selling and direct sales, 47% versus 53%, are they buying the same or different services?
Good question, and I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think, at the end of the day, I don't think we, in that particular survey, well, actually, let me let Rachel answer that question.
Yeah. So if we look for, say, SaaS versus infrastructure, what we found was that, and we obviously have it by individual product category as well. We won't go into that in detail, but what we saw for service as a software, they purchased through a channel partner 42% of the time in the aggregate level. Now, there's certain product categories that will purchase much more frequently through a channel partner than others. For example, CRM. CRM was purchased through a channel partner much more frequently than, say, something like business intelligence. I think, again, that all attributes back to the fact that for business intelligence applications, it being new, and they want that strategic guidance and more information and maybe some customization for them, they're going directly to the actual tech vendor that provides that application and going directly to them versus going through our channel partners who maybe don't have that expertise. On the infrastructure side of the house, they're going to channel partners 52% of the time in the aggregate. Again, there's certain infrastructure products that they go to the channel partners more often than others. For example, the data storage or backup, that's 65% of the time they're going to channel partners to make that purchase.
Yeah, so the net of it is, I think, if in the categories of both SaaS and infrastructure as a service that are more mature, then we see higher utilization of indirect channels. The reverse is true for some of the less mature categories.
Great. Is there any data that you may have relative to the percent of relationships being established directly between resellers and service providers versus resellers with OEMs and service providers?
Yeah, and that's an interesting, I think, again, it's probably worth another discussion. As we got into some of those roles, we talked about we actually gathered information in terms of what the reseller was doing, what the service provider was doing, and what the OEM was doing. So I think in the research that we showed, we aggregated the two. So I think we can parse that apart a little bit. And like I said, if you want to shoot me a note with that question, we could take you through that with maybe some more granular views of the data.
Great. Do you have any suggestions for the best way to help partners develop cloud consulting practices?
Interesting. Yeah. So how do you do this? How do you make them cloud Sherpas? I think obviously we're seeing a number of companies sort of reinventing or restructuring their partner programs with this objective in mind. We see definitely there's a lot more focus on kind of sub-programs building out individual competencies. I guess what we're seeing is that there's really no silver bullet on this topic. I think, well, as we're helping companies think about, generally channel enablement, particularly over the last few years, we've seen lots and lots of companies dump lots of money into enablement, and they're not seeing the impact. And the reason why is that we think that there's some segmentation that needs to be done first. There needs to be a base level of capability before it's really worthwhile to try to enable people to play this role. So first thing is, I think, is to actually segment your partner base to find those partners who have invested in the kind of the foundational requirements to be more of a consultant or advisor. And then I think there's a tendency to try to enable partners by providing what we call a sort of downstream support, giving them a bunch of marketing assets, training, things that help them, basically in their interaction directly with the partners, and not enough focus on helping them further upstream grow their businesses. So I think there's some interesting, I guess, some areas that really need to be addressed in this is helping not just people, in their actual sales and marketing activity, but actually help them think about building a practice and building that into their business model. So step one is definitely segment the partner base and find those that are worth actually investing in. And step two is to think further upstream about helping them shape their practice versus giving them tools that help them with interaction with their customers. And again, that's a longer conversation we could definitely talk through for those that are interested.
Excellent. Well, that looks like that's all the questions we have at this point. So I figure we can wrap it up. John, Rachel, thank you very much again for your time and your expertise. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks for all of you on the phone. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. Please do take a few minutes to fill out your post-survey event. We do love to hear everyone's input and use that to make all of our future events a little bit better. But this does conclude today's conference, and you may now disconnect.